I used to believe my thesis would be the final thing to keep me tethered to this place, the last milestone before I could leave university behind and step into something resembling a future. I never expected he would be the thing that made me stay. I had just submitted the final draft of my thesis, a 200-page deep dive into the politics of queer identity in post-colonial literature. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and maybe that was my mistake, being too honest, too vulnerable on paper. The same way I'd never dared to be in person. Professor Halden was known for being meticulous, critical, brilliant. He was also the only professor I knew who wore cufflinks to class and smelled like cedar and dry tobacco. His lectures could silence an auditorium with a whisper. I sat in his office now, across from his desk, his rejection letter trembling in my hands like it had a heartbeat of its own. "This isn't your best work," he said, his voice a slow drawl that carried both disappointment and something else I couldn't place. "You've got passion, but you've let emotion overpower your argument." Emotion. That word echoed like a slap. I could hardly meet his eyes. Eyes that had, once or twice, lingered too long on me after class. Eyes that narrowed when he smiled, but only faintly, like he was never fully giving you all of himself. I can rewrite it," I said, my voice hollow. "Just give me some direction. I need to graduate this semester." His fingers steepled beneath his chin, and for a beat too long, he said nothing. The silence felt sharp. I focused on the way the golden light from the window cast a warm glow over the spines of his books, meticulously arranged, leather-bound, like they hadn't been touched in years. Then he spoke, and it was as if he wasn't just talking about my thesis anymore. "You're too concerned with being safe," he said, "on the page, and in life." My breath caught. He was looking at me now, not with irritation or critique, but like he saw something in me I'd tried to keep buried. And suddenly, the office felt too small. The door was closed. The air too still. My hands were damp where they gripped the arms of my chair. "I'm just trying to pass," I murmured, almost apologetically. He stood then, slowly, and walked around to lean against the edge of the desk, much closer to me now. There was something unspoken in his movements, calculated, controlled. "You're smart, articulate, passionate," he said quietly, "but passion without risk, that's just performance." His words were heavy, like they weren't only meant for my writing. My skin prickled. I had never told anyone, not about the way my heart beat a little faster when his hand brushed mine during the return of a marked paper, or the way I sometimes stayed behind after lectures just to hear him speak a little longer. I always told myself it was respect, admiration, nothing more. But now sitting there, feeling the weight of his gaze, something unspoken shifted between us, and I couldn't tell if it terrified me or thrilled me. He reached for the printed copy of my thesis beside him. "Rewrite it," he said, but softer now. "Come back to me when you're ready to write what you really mean." And then he smiled. Not the polite professor smile. A real one. The kind that slipped past his usual composure, just for a second. I left his office with my heart pounding, my thoughts spinning, and something else I hadn't expected. The unsettling feeling that I had just crossed the line and there was no going back. And maybe I didn't want to. Before that meeting, before the moment, Professor Halden was already more than just a name on my course schedule. I took his class in second year, purely by accident. A scheduling issue pushed me into literature and identity, and I remember resenting it at first. But he walked into that lecture hall with his sleeves rolled up, reading glasses dangling from one hand, and quoted Baldwin like it was gospel. Not to perform, not to impress. It was just the way he spoke. The words mattered to him, and soon they mattered to me too. By the end of that semester, I had taken another class of his, then another. I became that student, the one always front row, always raising my hand, not for attention, just because I wanted to hear his response. I craved it, like a drug. The way he'd tilt his head slightly before answering, or how he'd pause for half a second, as if making sure his words were sharp enough to cut right through the noise. Somewhere along the way, our dynamic shifted, not obviously not enough for anyone to question. But there were moments, like the time I caught him watching me as I packed up my things after class, or when he lingered beside me during a student reading, his hand brushing against the small of my back as he leaned in to whisper, "Good interpretation. You saw the thread no one else did." It was the kind of praise that settled under my skin for days. Still, there was a wall between us, a professional boundary, one I never imagined he would breach until that day in his office, when he told me to come back when I was ready to write what I really meant. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That week, I stayed up late most nights trying to revise my thesis, but my mind kept drifting to the way his voice dropped at the end of that sentence, to how close he stood when he handed me back the pages. I started showing up at his open hours more often under the guise of needing guidance. He never sent me away. Sometimes we talked about books. Other times, it veered. One afternoon, as I sat across from him, notebook in hand but barely scribbling, he leaned back in his chair and said with a smirk, "You've been coming here a lot lately. Must be desperate for approval." "I just value your feedback," I said, keeping it neutral, though my stomach twisted. He raised an eyebrow. "Only my feedback?" I looked away, heart racing. Our banter started evolving into something ... sharper, playful, but with a weight behind it. There was one particular memory that stayed with me. Late March, the university hosted a literary retreat for senior students. A weekend at a countryside villa, where we could immerse in creative thinking. Professors were invited to bait. I hadn't expected him to come. When he stepped off the charter bus in his navy coat and leather satchel slung over his shoulder, I felt my stomach sink and rise all at once. We weren't assigned rooms on beds, and, by some terrible luck or strange design, the only one left was next to his. That night, the fireplace was crackling in the common lounge. We'd been drinking cheap wine from paper cups, surrounded by sleepy laughter and open books. I sat beside him on the long sofa, both of us angled toward the fire. At some point, he leaned over to grab a pen from the floor, and his knee brushed mine. He didn't move it. Neither did I. "You write like someone who's afraid they'll be misunderstood," he said softly, still facing the fire. "But your silence says more than your words ever could." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, like I understood. But the truth was, I didn't want to be misunderstood by him more than anyone else. Later that night, as we slipped into our adjacent twin beds, the only sound was the soft creak of the wood floor and the ticking of a vintage wall clock. The room was small and dimly lit by a single lamp. He looked over at me as I pulled the covers up. "Not used to sharing space?" he asked. I chuckled nervously. "Not like this." His voice lowered. "Don't worry, I won't bite a beat, unless invited." My breath hitched. He turned away after that, back to me, but I couldn't sleep. I lay awake for hours, watching the soft rise and fall of his shoulders, wondering what line we were walking on, and whether I wanted to cross it. The next morning, I woke to find his scarf draped over my chair, even though it had been in his bag the night before. Just a coincidence, maybe, or maybe not. It was always like that. Fragments, half-said things, a glance that lasted too long, a brush of fingertips when we passed papers, conversations that started academic and ended somewhere personal. He never said anything outright. Neither did I, but my chest ached with it, wanting something, fearing it, because as much as I admired him, respected him, I couldn't help the part of me that felt something more. Something that I knew could break everything, if it ever came to light. But I also knew this: the way he looked at me, it wasn't nothing. And the longer we danced around it, the more dangerous and tempting it became. It happened the last night of the retreat. The villa's heating system had failed earlier that evening. Some electrical short, one of the staff said, and the technicians couldn't make it until morning. They handed out extra quilts and apologetic smiles, but the cold seeped in anyway deep into the walls, into our bones. Most of the students huddled downstairs, dragging mattresses into the common area to sleep closer to the fireplace. But I stayed back, reluctant to join the crowd, hoping maybe the cold would keep me awake just long enough to revise one more paragraph. Professor Halden hadn't left either. He stood at the window of our shared room, silhouetted by moonlight, a glass of something amber in his hand. His coat was still on, collar turned up. He looked strangely distant, like he was somewhere else. "You're not going to join them?" I asked from the bed, trying to sound casual. He turned, eyes meeting mine. "I prefer silence and my own space." I nodded, but that didn't answer my real question: why here, with me? I shivered beneath the thin blanket. This room's basically a fridge now. He watched me for a second longer before he crossed to the closet and pulled out the emergency quilt they'd left. He hesitated, then said, almost offhand, "We could share it." I blinked. "I don't mind the floor," I replied quickly. Too quickly. "You can take the bed." He smiled faintly. "Don't be noble. It's too cold for pride." There was no innuendo in his voice, no teasing, just tired warmth. But my stomach still twisted as he kicked off his shoes, set his glass on the nightstand, and slid into the small twin bed beside me. The heavy quilt draped over both of us. The mattress dipped beneath his weight. We weren't touching, not quite, but I could feel the heat of him radiating just inches away. His breathing, slow and even, filled the space between us. My own chest felt tight. "Try to sleep," he murmured after a long moment. "We'll be out of here by morning." But how could I sleep? My body was tense. Every inch of me felt awake, aware of his nearness, of how intimate this was, how quiet, how charged. I turned slightly, trying not to shift the mattress too much. But in doing so, my hand brushed his. Not entirely by accident. He didn't pull away. Instead, after a beat of silence, he said softly, "You've always looked at me like you were trying to solve a riddle." My breath hitched. "I wasn't," I began, but stopped, because I had been, for years, studying him, reading between the lines, wondering where the mask ended and he began. He exhaled, the sound threading through the dim light like smoke. I don't mean that as a complaint. We were facing each other now. In the half-light, I could see the outline of his features, the faint furrow of his brow, the way his lips parted slightly, as if weighing words. "You're hard to read," I whispered. "Sometimes I feel like I see glimpses, and then you vanish behind that professor version of yourself." Something in his expression flickered. He turned his face toward the ceiling. "It's easier that way," he said, "to stay unreadable, to stay safe." I stared at him. "You think being seen is unsafe?" His gaze returned to mine, slowly. "I think being seen by the wrong person can ruin you." The air felt heavier after that, and yet, beneath that weight, something cracked open between us. My fingers, almost on instinct, inched toward his again. This time, when they brushed, he let them stay. The contact was so slight, it could have been dismissed, but to me, it was electric. I swallowed hard. "What if," I whispered, "the person isn't wrong?" A long pause. Then, finally, he spoke barely above a breath. "Then that would terrify me even more." My heart thudded in my chest. I wanted to move closer. I wanted to reach out, to make it obvious, to say it. But I didn't, because in that moment, I understood something. He wanted this closeness, but he didn't know what to do with it. Not yet. Not when the lines were still so blurred. Not when his name was still at the top of my thesis. So I didn't press further. Instead, I whispered, "I don't want to ruin you." He closed his eyes. "You wouldn't." And then, Finally, he let his hand slip fully into mine beneath the blanket. Just that. No kiss, no grand declaration, just quiet, warm contact in the stillness of a too-cold room, a gesture that said more than anything else could have. I stayed awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep, holding his hand, holding the weight of everything we hadn't said. The next morning, he was up before me. By the time I opened my eyes, he was already dressed, sipping coffee by the window again. The hand that had held mine was tucked neatly into his pocket now, all his usual calm, professional edges restored. "We leave in an hour," he said, without looking at me. "You'll want to get breakfast before the bus." Something cracked in my chest. He wasn't being cold, just careful. The version of him from the night before had been folded away like a note never meant to be read aloud. I nodded silently and got dressed. On the bus ride back, he sat 2 rows behind me. We didn't speak, didn't exchange glances, but at one point, as I stared out the window, lost in a flurry of thoughts, I felt something small and soft touch the back of my head. I turned, and there it was, his scarf, the same one he'd left for me that night, in March now. Passed wordlessly down the aisle, I held it tight in my lap, the whole ride back. Something had shifted between us, and we both knew it, but neither of us was ready to name it yet. Not with everyone watching, not when the power dynamic still lingered between us like smoke in the air. Not when one wrong word could collapse everything we'd carefully balanced. But his scarf smelled like him, and that was enough for now. It didn't happen the next day, or the next week. We slipped back into routine like nothing had happened. Professor Halden resumed his lectures with his usual calm detachment, and I resumed pretending I was just another student, anonymous, unremarkable, untouched. But I wasn't. Not anymore. We didn't speak of that night at the villa, of the shared bed, the lingering handhold, the words that hovered like ghosts in the silence between us. But I kept the scarf. I kept it in the back pocket of my satchel, running my fingers over the fabric during class, when I was sure no one was looking. It had become a secret talisman, a tether to something that had almost been real. Almost. One afternoon, a few weeks later, he returned my thesis draft again, scribbled with edits. Still not approved. I met him during his office hours, determined not to let my frustration show, even though my chest burned. "I thought it was closer this time," I said, holding the marked-up pages. He didn't look up. "It is, but not there yet." "You keep saying that." My voice was tighter than I meant it to be. "But you don't tell me what's missing. Just vague suggestions. It's like I'm guessing what you want from me, instead of learning." His eyes finally lifted. There was something dark behind them. Not anger. Something deeper. Something he didn't want to show. "You're not guessing," he said, voice low. "You know exactly what I want." The room went still. I couldn't breathe for a second. I gripped the edge of his desk, unsure if I'd heard him right. But he didn't clarify, didn't take it back. Instead, he rose from his chair, slow and deliberate, and walked around to stand beside me. His presence always did something to the air around him, made it heavier, sharper. I could feel it now as he leaned back against the desk, arms crossed. "You're scared," he said softly. I scoffed, looking away. "I'm not scared. I'm confused." "No," he said. "You're scared, and so am I." That stopped me cold. He dropped his gaze, rubbing his thumb across his wrist, like it helped him concentrate. "Do you think this is easy for me? You think I haven't noticed the way you look at me, like I'm some equation you're desperate to solve, or that I haven't spent nights regretting how close I let myself get to you?" I swallowed hard, my chest tightening with every word. "You're my student," he said, like he was trying to convince himself of something. "I'm supposed to have boundaries." "You think I don't know that?" I whispered. "Do you think I haven't spent months trying to convince myself this isn't what I want?" He flinched. His jaw clenched. I stepped closer, not touching, just near. close enough for him to feel the heat of what I wasn't saying. But I do, I said quietly. Want it. You. I don't even know when it started. Maybe the second you called me out in that lecture hall, like you could see right through me. Or maybe that night at the villa, when you let me see just a little bit of the man behind the professor mask. He was breathing heavier now, his arms uncrossed, fingers curling against the edge of the desk. You think this ends well? He asked. For either of us? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it. I'm tired of wondering if I imagined it all. You didn't, he said. Too fast, too raw. That silenced us both. We stood there in the quiet, everything unsaid, vibrating between us like electricity. Then his hand reached out, hesitant, slow, as if he was afraid I'd flinch. He cupped the side of my face, thumb brushing just under my eye. You drive me mad, he said, voice cracking. And I can't stop thinking about you. The breath left my lungs. I tell myself I'm just helping you, guiding your writing. Your ideas, Bet. That's not why I keep pulling you back. That's not why I keep finding reasons to keep you near. My voice was barely a whisper. Then why? Because I want you, he said. And it terrifies me. Something inside me shattered and mended all at once. I leaned into his touch. Just a little. He didn't move away. I want you too, I breathed. That was the moment the tension broke. It wasn't a cinematic kiss, not a sudden pull or dramatic grab. It was slow, careful. His forehead rested against mine first, like we needed to memorize the weight of this moment we couldn't undo. I shouldn't, he murmured. But you are, I said. My lips just inches from his dot, and then finally, he kissed me. His lips were warm, steady. There was nothing rushed about it, no desperation, just quiet permission, a question, and my answer, whispered back with every soft press of my mouth to his. When we finally pulled apart, his hand still on my cheek, our eyes met. I can't promise this won't be complicated, he said, voice low and shaking. Nothing worth it ever isn't, I replied. He smiled. That real fleeting smile I'd only seen once or twice. I stepped back, just enough to breathe again. What happens now? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Just looked at me, eyes heavy with emotion. I approve your thesis, he said finally, because you finally told the truth. On paper, and here, I blinked. You're serious. I've been serious for a long time, I laughed. I couldn't help it, half shock, half relief. We sat after that, him behind his desk again, me in the same seat I'd occupied a dozen times, but the air was different now, softer, safer. We talked not just about the thesis, but about everything we'd avoided, about what this meant, about the time we needed, the patience it would require. We didn't pretend we'd solved everything with a kiss, but we stopped pretending it wasn't real. When I left his office that day, I didn't feel confused or ashamed or afraid. I felt light, like I was finally standing in the truth I'd been circling for months. The next few days passed like I was floating just slightly above the world. Everything looked the same classes, same hallways, same campus coffee that always tasted like overworked ambition, but I wasn't the same. Not after what had happened in his office. Not after he kissed me like I was something he'd been holding back from for too long. I still couldn't say his name out loud. Even in my head, it felt too big, too delicate. He wasn't just Professor Halden anymore, he was him. The man who had confessed he couldn't stop thinking about me. The one who touched my face like he was scared he might break something. The first time we saw each other again after that day, it was after hours. He'd sent me a simple message. Come by, if you want to. I almost didn't. My fingers hovered over the I'll be there text longer than I cared to admit. But when I walked into his office, he was already waiting, coat off, sleeves rolled up, glasses hanging from the collar of his shirt. He didn't get up, just looked at me like he was still memorizing the truth of me. You came, he said. Wasn't sure I should. His mouth quirked. Me, neither. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. This time, I didn't sit on the other side of the desk. I leaned against the bookshelf near him, folding my arms in a mock-serious pose. So, I said, you only approve my thesis after I confess my undying love. That's definitely ethical. He let out a laugh, an actual laugh, not the dry, polite one I usually got in class. If that's your version of undying love, your writing still needs work. Excuse me, I said, faking offense. That was vulnerable. I admitted things. I narrowed my eyes. You're teasing me. His smile deepened, only because you're easier to read now. I rolled my eyes, but my chest swelled with something warm. We were lighter now, still cautious, still careful. But the weight between us had shifted into something almost playful. We talked for over an hour, not about the thesis, not about grades or deadlines or academic conferences, but about us, where this was going. I don't want to keep it a secret forever, I said at one point, running my fingers over the edge of his desk. But I get it. We need to be careful. Just until graduation. He nodded slowly. That's 3 months. I can wait. He looked at me, something tender in his expression. I didn't think I'd ever find myself here with a student. With you. It's not just the rules. It's that I don't usually let anyone in. I stepped closer. You let me in. I know, he said, almost a whisper. And it's terrifying. I didn't touch him. Not yet. But I let my hand rest near his on the desk. Our fingers didn't touch, but the closeness was enough. I've never felt this with anyone before, I admitted. The way you challenge me. The way you see through me. You've never had someone read you like a book before, he teased, gently. I smirked. Well, maybe not one with so many red ink corrections. He chuckled, then turned serious. I do see you. I always have. There was silence again, comfortable this time. Then, softly, he said, do you regret it? Us? He nodded. I shook my head. No, I regret not being honest sooner. That night, we didn't kiss again, but he walked me to the door. And just before I stepped out, he brushed his fingers along my wrist. A fleeting touch. Barely there, but it made my skin sing. We started seeing each other in stolen moments, late night coffees, in quiet corners of the faculty lounge. A hand on my back that lingered half a second too long. Long conversations in his office, with the door discreetly locked, where we sat too close on that little couch by the window and talked about things that had nothing to do with school. One night I asked him, what happens when I'm not your student anymore? He smiled thoughtfully. Then maybe I'll finally be brave enough to take you out for dinner in public. I grinned. That's it. No wine, no roses. He reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. You're the rose. That's enough. I looked away, flustered. But my fingers stayed wrapped in his. These moments didn't erase the risk, but we held on to them like promises. Quiet, steady promises that this we was real. Graduation came on a quiet Thursday morning. No crowds, no loud applause. Just a trimmed ceremony in the university's oldest courtyard, where we were called up one by one to collect our degrees under the filtered shade of century-old trees. I wore a borrowed suit. The sleeves were too long. He sat on the far end of the faculty line, his arms folded, sunglasses on, pretending not to look at me. But when my name was called, I glanced up instinctively. He didn't clap, but his smile. God, that smile held the world after the ceremony. While the rest of the students huddled together for photos and drinks, I slipped back toward the building. To his office, the place where everything started and changed. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. The door creaked open to the familiar smell of books, ink, and the faint scent of his cologne that always reminded me of cedar and something just slightly dangerous. He was already waiting inside, standing by the window. You're early, he said, without turning. I smiled. closing the door behind me. You're predictable. That's offensive, he said, glancing over his shoulder. I'm mysterious. You're many things, I replied, walking slowly toward him, my hands in my pockets. But mysterious isn't one of them, not to me. He turned fully. Then, stepping closer, he looked different without the layers of academia, no lecture, no distance between us, just a man, and me, finally no longer a student. Congratulations, he said softly. You did it. We did, I said, tilting my head. You helped more than you'll ever admit. He reached into the drawer behind him and pulled out a folded piece of paper, my final thesis. Bound and approved. You were ready all along, he said. You just needed to stop hiding. I took the paper and let my fingers linger against his for just a second longer than necessary. I'm not hiding anymore, I said. His smile softened. No, you're not. We stood there for a while, wrapped in a silence that didn't need filling. The campus buzzed faintly outside, the distant sound of celebration. But in here it was just us and something better than closure, a beginning. I booked a table, he said, after a moment, somewhere quiet, off campus, late enough, so no one sees us leave together. I chuckled, still cautious. For now. I stepped forward, took his hand, the one that used to hold red pens and pages filled with edits, and linked our fingers together. You know, I said, I don't care if anyone sees. Not anymore. His thumb traced mine. I care a little, he admitted, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I want us to be real, not a rumor. Not something they gossip about in faculty lounges or turn into a scandal. And we are real, I said. He nodded. Exactly. There was something deeply intimate about the way he said it, like a promise wrapped inside a whisper. And then he reached into his desk drawer again. This time, he pulled out something smaller key. I blinked. He held it between his fingers, dangling slightly. To my place. Not a dramatic gesture. Just, in case you ever want to stop by, when I'm not there, or when I am. I didn't speak for a second. My heart had stopped. Then I took the key from him slowly, feeling the cool metal press against my palm. You sure? He nodded. No, but I want to be. I laughed softly, eyes burning just a little. He stepped forward, kissed my forehead gently, his hands cupping my jaw. It wasn't rushed or desperate, just honest. Just us. And as we stood there, in the same office where we'd danced around our feelings for months, I realized something. We weren't rushing into forever. We weren't promising perfection. But we were starting. With small things. A dinner reservation. A spare key. A hand held in a quiet room. The kind of beginning that didn't need fireworks. Just two people brave enough to say, I want this. I want you. Later that night, we sat in his apartment on the floor. Because the couch was covered in books and drank cheap red wine out of mismatched mugs. I leaned against his shoulder, and he traced lazy circles on my knee. You still scare me, he whispered, almost like he was ashamed to say it. I smiled into his arm. Good, then we're even. He laughed, kissed my temple, and said nothing more. We didn't need to, because sometimes love doesn't begin with a grand declaration. Sometimes it begins quietly, in a professor's office. In the unspoken space between edits and glances. In a scarf passed down a bus aisle. And sometimes it begins with just one simple truth. I see you. And I'm not going anywhere.